Okay, so welcome back to Hebrew Story Hour. We're going to do chapter 3, and then we'll talk a little bit. So Ruth chapter 3. Vatomer la Naomi chamota, biti halo avakesh lach manoach asher yitav lach, va'ata halo voaz modatanu asher hayit et na'arotav. Hine hu zoreh et goren ha-seorim halayla. Verse 3. Barachatzt basacht basamt simlotach alayach vayaradta or vayarad hagoren al tivadi laish ad kaloto le'echol le'lishtot. Verse 4. Vihi b'shokvo v'yada'at et hamakom asher yishkav sham uvat v'gilit margalotav v'sachavt v'hu yagid lach et asher ta'asin. All right, now there's a big chunk. We're going to go back and translate verse 1 through 4. Naomi said to her, or Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek for you security so that it'll be good for you? And now, is Boaz not one of our kinsmen, among whose young women you were? Behold, or look, he is winnowing at the threshing floor of barley tonight. So you should wash and you should anoint, you should put on your cloak, and you should go down to the threshing floor. Do not let yourself be known to a man until, or maybe to the man, until he finishes eating and drinking." In verse 4. And it will be that when he lies down, you will know the place where he lies, and you will enter and you'll uncover the place of his feet, and you should lie down, and then he will tell you what you should do. Verse 5. Vatomer eleha kol asher tomri. Okay, you could say Eli. We can come back to some of these. There's lots of what we call katif kares in this passage. Verse 6. Vatera hagorin vataas kechol asher tzivita or tzivata chamota. Verse 7. Vayochal Boaz vayesht vayitav libo vayavo lishkav b'ktse ha'arima vatavo balat vatagal margalotav vatishkav vayehi b'chatzi halayla vayechered ha'ish vayelafet vahine isha shochevet margalotav. That's the end of verse 8. We're going to translate now with verse 5. And she said to her, "Everything which you say to me, I will do." And she went down to the threshing floor, and she did just as she had her mother-in-law had commanded her. And Boaz ate and he drank, and his heart was glad. And he entered he went to lay down at the edge of the heap of grain. And then she came in secretly And she uncovered the place of his feet, and she laid down. And it was in the middle of the night, the man startled awake, and he turned over, and look, a woman was laying at the place of his feet. Verse 9. Vayomer mi'at, vatomer anochi Ruth, amatecha, ufarashta chanafecha, al amatecha ki goel ata. Verse 10. Vayomer burucha at, ladonai biti, hetaft chasdech ha-acharon, min harishon, levilti leket, achere habachurim im dal ve'im ashir. Verse 11. Va'ata biti al tiri kol asher tomri, e'esed lach, ki yodea kol sha'ar ami ki eshet chayil at. Stopping there, verse 9, translating, and he said, "Who are you?" And she said, "I am Ruth, your maidservant. You should spread your wing over your maidservant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "Blessed are you by the Lord, my daughter. Your most recent act of kindness, or of chesed, is better than the former. By not going after the younger men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. Everything which you say, I will do for you, because the whole gate of my people knows that you are a woman of valor." Verse 12. Va'ata ki amnam ki goel anochi, v'gam yesh goel karov mimeni. Verse 13. Lini halayla v'haya v'boker im yigalech tov yigal, ve'im lo yakpots legalech ugaltich anochi chayaronai shechvi ad haboker. Okay, pausing there, verse 12 and 13. And now, truly, it's true that I am a redeemer. And also there is a nearer redeemer than me. Stay here tonight, and in the morning, or when morning comes, if he will redeem you, good, let him redeem. But if he will not, or if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you, I myself, as the Lord lives. Lie down until the morning. Okay, verse 14. Vatishkav margalotav ad haboker vatakom vaterim yakir ish et re'ehu vayomer al yivada ki ba'a or va'a ha-isha hagoren. Verse 15. Vayomer havi hamitpachat asher alayich ve'echozi va vatoches va vayamod shesh seorim vayashet alecha vayavo ha'ir. Translating now at 14. And she lay down at the place of his feet until the morning. She got up before a man could recognize his neighbor. And for he said, this is perhaps for he said to himself, do not let the woman do not let it be known that the woman had come to the threshing floor. verse 15. And he said, stretch out your, stretch out your shawl, or stretch out the shawl, which is upon you, and hold it out, or hold on to it. And she held on to it, and he measured 6 barleys, and he put upon her, he set it upon her, and he entered the city. Verse 16. Vatavo el chamotah, vatomer mi'at biti, vatagid la et kol asher asa la ha'ish. Verse 17. Vatomer shesh haseorim ha'ele natan li ki amar elai al tavoi rekam el chamotech. Verse 18. Vatomer shvi viti ad asher teidin ech yipol davar ki lo yishkot ha'ish ki im kila hadavar hayom. Okay, and translating then with 16. And then she went to her mother-in-law, and she said, "Who are you, my daughter?" And she told her all that the man had done for her. And she said, these 6 barleys he gave to me, or 6 measures of barley he gave to me. Because he said to me, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. And she said, stay here, my daughter, or sit, my daughter, until you know how this matter will fall out. For the man will not be quiet until the matter has been completed today. There's the end of chapter 3. Okay, so there's, I don't know how many of you are following on the Hebrew. There's some difficulties in this chapter. If you heard me make decisions on the fly, sometimes the Hebrew Bible has what we call a katif kareh. It's the consonants are written one way, but the Masoretes want you to read it a different way, so they add vowels in. And there's a couple of places here and actually the next chapter that are difficult for some of that. But let me throw it open, see what anything that you noticed or anything you want to ask about. While you're thinking about things, I'll say, of course, this is the threshing floor. It's in secret. It's dangerous for Ruth. I think we get this question twice, mi'at. Always thought that was a cool narrative thing where clearly Boaz doesn't know her identity. It's just a woman laying there. And so it's a straightforward question, like, who are you? And she answers with, I'm Ruth. But the second time it gets asked by Naomi, and she clearly knows her. She calls her Biti, my daughter, like, who are you? And then she answers with telling the story about what Boaz had done for her. And I think Naomi is not asking for her identity, but her status. But that mi'at is there in both places. There's this kind of ongoing question about Ruth's identity from the very beginning of the book. She's this Moabitess. The narrator doesn't let you forget that, but then she's moving from total outsider to insider throughout the book.
Does it play into this, that this is the middle of the night? It's too dark for either individual actually to know who this is?
Definitely with Boaz. With Boaz for sure, but Naomi says, who are you, my daughter? I mean, you could read this as, who are you, my daughter? But Ruth doesn't say, oh, it's me, Ruth. Ruth says, and this is verse 16, Ruth answers by telling her everything that the man did for her. So I think I think Naomi knows it's Ruth who's come in, but there's a little bit more to the kind of who are you really?
Yeah, I agree with you. She's wondering about how to go would be
Yeah.
our language. But how to go just tells once again a story. But Naomi's interest is securing a place for Ruth.
Right.
Relationship.
For sure. From the very beginning, when Naomi is sending Orpah and Ruth back, says just find some security. And then we get this again at the beginning of chapter 3, where they get Manoach, this kind of rest, or I'm seeking security for you, so it'll be good for you. But that's definitely Naomi's mission, to seek security for Ruth.
And in that vein, it seems like Naomi throughout this has really known what's going on.
Yeah.
For instance, in verse 2, she says, tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty specific task.
Yeah.
But somehow she's got some insight into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's perhaps barley harvest time or winnowing time, and so she just figures, but she's right about everything. And also, I mean, she's going to tell Ruth exactly what to do, and she seems to know exactly what Boaz is going to do. It is interesting to compare what Naomi tells Ruth to do and then what Ruth does, because there's a lot of symmetry. But like, she tells her to, to wash and anoint and then put on your cloak. And then about halfway through verse 3, go down to the threshing floor in secrecy. Do not into the man until he's finished eating and drinking, right? And then when he lies down, you'll know the place where he's lying. And then you should go and uncover the place of his feet and lie down, right? So, and then we get this, she did a kind of a summary verse. She did everything that she said she would. I'll do everything you say I would do. And then when Ruth we get the narration about what she does. I guess this is pretty soon after verse 7 and 8. She goes in secrecy. She lies down he lies down. She enters in secrecy. She uncovers the place of his feet and lays down. Right. So she does, Ruth is totally obedient. I have heard some people say Ruth sometimes goes one more than what Naomi is asking. Because even when Naomi says he'll tell you what to do, but Ruth actually tells him, you're the Redeemer. You should, put your wing over me. Naomi never told her to do that. And when there's this much of repetition, it's at least worth considering that what Ruth is doing that Naomi didn't tell her to do, and sort of going further, taking it's a pretty big risk that she's taking.
Yeah.
There are two times through there that I noticed in the Lexham Hebrew English interlinear that it takes a word that is, you're reading third person, she lay down, or you lay down, second person, and renders it as I lay down. Is there something going on in the grammar there?
Yeah, do you see a particular verse where you see this?
In verse 3,
Okay.
the interlinear says, you shall wash and you shall anoint, and you shall put your clothing on you, and I shall go down to the threshing floor.
Yeah, it is. It's one of these places where what we call a katif kare. So in the Hebrew the Masoretic text, it's vayarad or vayarati. Vayarati is I will go down. Vayarad, which you will go down. And it's in the consonantal text, there's a yod. So it seems like that would be the form for I will go down. But the Masoretes, they won't mess with the consonants, but they change the vowel to a simple shavai via rat, and you will go down. So they're sort of like subtly correcting. There is one possibility that vayarati is an older form of the second person. And we see this form show up occasionally. So it may be that Naomi is using this kind of older form for whatever reason, that the Masoretes don't know about, because it's not the way that they speak Hebrew or the way that they read Hebrew. So that it's still a second person and it doesn't need to be corrected. You get it again in verse 4. I think maybe you mentioned this one, you will lie down or I will lie down.
Yeah, I shall lie down, yeah, verse 4 also.
I mean, the argument for Naomi saying, I will go down and I will lay down would be, although I wouldn't make this argument myself, would be though that it's like Naomi, as we're going to see, is going to experience all of the blessing that Ruth is. So she's like going with her in a sense. But of course, the difficulty in this is that all these other imperatives are second person, like feminine. So they're just directed to Ruth.
Is there a chance that Naomi wished she could be the wife of Boaz?
I don't think she ever expresses that, but we're going to see at the end of 4 how this all plays out for Naomi. I think she seems to be just exuberant that there's an opportunity for some security. She's going to have she will have something of a child at the end of this. A child's born to Naomi at the end of this. So she'll experience this, but it'd be hard to base that on these particular verbs, I think. One, because they do seem to be, I think they're an older historical form. And so I would still translate this as you should go down and you should lie down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So in today's environment and recent, I don't know how recent it is, but there's some folks that would say that the feet thing is a euphemism.
Yeah. I was waiting for that one.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, it's me. I'm that guy.
That's good. I would bring it up if you didn't.
I was also curious as to why the Song of Songs comes after Ruth and Boaz story in the old. That's neither here nor there. But if you could just speak to that in general.
Yeah, so. I kind of changed my mind on this a few years ago. The word itself is it's a little different. The word for foot is regel. This is margalotav, like the place of his feet. So it's it has a mem on the front of it. And I think it's hedging a little bit away from the euphemism. But there is a euphemism in the Hebrew Bible that shows up, this of uncovering feet, and feet being a euphemism for nakedness. And it's not just sex or in a sexual context, but there's a place where I think it's Saul who uncovers his feet because he's using the cave to go to the bathroom, basically. And then, like in Isaiah 6, we have the seraphim covering their eyes and covering their feet. That probably is indicating they're covering up their nakedness in the presence of God. So it shows up in some other places as well. So and certainly here, like, what does it mean? Ruth is clearly getting next to him in the middle of the night while he's had a lot to drink. He's glad in the heart. And so I do think there is a lot of euphemism in this. It's not just, I wouldn't say it's so romantic, so much of a romantic scene, but there's a lot of the danger for her is being taken advantage of. Like she's putting her place in a super vulnerable spot sexually. And so there's, by her uncovering the place of his feet, it's sort of like, it's hinting, it's hedging. It's not quite the euphemism that it would be as uncovering his feet. Moreover, in this story, I mean, she uncovers his feet and he doesn't wake up until the middle of the night and sees this woman here. And then he says, well, stay here at the place of my feet, which I don't think she's actually lying like perpendicular or at the bottom of his bed or something. I think when she says, spread your wing over me, which we could talk more about that too. I think that's sort of like, if he's got a blanket or covered up, she's under there with him. But
so she's not offering herself, she's being courageous.
I would say yes to both of those, actually. She is being courageous and she is offering herself. But Boaz, almost in an inhuman way, is resisting and says, we got to do this right. Say, stay here. He says, stay here until the morning because it's dangerous out there. And but let's take care of this in an orderly way. So I don't think they have sex. I don't think the scene means us to, but she is, I think, offering herself that way, which is essentially would unite them in marriage if he would accept. It's not quite her proposal, but it's something like that, her proposal to him.
So as it is to kind of follow on from that, is this a counter to or a follow on? Because I've forgotten a lot of the dates. I've kind of come to the conclusion that a lot of the Old Testament was kind of put together in Babylon. That's just where I am. I don't know where everybody else is.
Yeah.
So is this a counter to what's going on at the end of Ezra and Nehemiah with the foreign wives thing? How would is this a yeah, but Ruth kind of thing?
Yeah, the way I usually think of it, I mean, Ezra and Nehemiah, right? It's kind of a legal text and has a very different feel, kind of narrative, whereas this is sort of, I think it's probably written as, I mean, the way the book begins, in the time of the judges, sort of a long, long time ago, in this sort of earlier time in our national history, there was this one Moabitess family that moved to Moab, and Moab is like the enemy of enemies for Israel. They're not allowed in the temple. They conflict with the migrants, the Exodus community. So there's sort of like, there's a real stigma to her being a Moabitess. And yet she becomes clearly this man of valor marries this woman of valor. Like she demonstrates with her character that she is worthy of being married to Boaz and being in the line of what will become David. So I think there is, the way I imagine this is that especially the post-exilic period, I don't know that Ruth was written in the post-exilic period, but I think there's a kind of conversation going on in the post-exilic period when they return from Babylon and they're thinking, who are we? What does it mean to be Jewish? And that's where we get Ezra, Nehemiah, Ezra's insistence on not marrying foreign women, divorcing your foreign wives, and so on. You even get Malachi in there with saying God hates divorce. That's a post-exilic text. And then books like Esther and Ruth that, I mean, they're dealing also with Jewish identity and this is a story about somebody coming into the people of Israel from the outside on the basis of their character, not on the basis of their nationality. I don't know that it's saying that these two are necessarily like butting heads, but I think there's a tension here. The texts are working out. They're demonstrating a kind of conversation going on in the post-exilic period.
So it raises a question in my mind. Why does the author of Ruth not deal with the transitions, the formal transition of nationality? There was in the law of Moses, there was a ritual a Gentile woman could go through. It wasn't circumcision, but there was a ritual, cutting off the hair and changing the clothes and all this. And it doesn't talk about that.
No.
Why?
Yeah, and even toward the end, she's still the Moabitess. She never leaves her. That, and the narrator is just not letting us forget that. I don't know. I don't know if this is advocating for, intermarriage. But I think it is at least expressing this idea that it's, this is a long, long time ago, right? Before, not necessarily before the time of Moses, not before the time of Moses, but still back in the days of the judges, they weren't looking too much at the law. They weren't like keeping a lot of the legal things. The nation hadn't formed. And so, I think it is making this really important point that it's on the basis of character that one becomes a part of the people of God and not on the basis of custom or ritual. It just says, it doesn't even bring it up. I don't know that it's an anti-custom or ritual, but there's nothing in here about her having to go through a certain ordination process or something.
Well, when she says to Naomi, I'm going to follow you.
Yeah.
Where you go, I will go. Your God is my God.
Right.
That's what she's saying is, and I think this is very important for balance. Ezra had a bunch of women that, like in the day of Balaam, would have drawn the men away from God.
Right.
Okay? And this is, that should not happen if you're going to have a nation stay the same. But in Ruth's case, she's willing to change everything to be identified with the God of Naomi.
Yeah, that's an important passage for sure. And beyond that, she says, your people are my people. It's sort of like, I'm already a part of your people. So on the one hand, we never forget that she's a Moabitess, but that this is why I think like the miat, who are you kind of question is really fruitful. And it doesn't, she doesn't perhaps give that up, but then she does become so totally integrated into Israel. And then this is an issue, as you all are bringing up in other places in the Bible where Moses is married to a non-Israelite, Zipporah, right? She's a Midianite woman. And, you could say, I guess that was before the Torah or something like this, but on the one hand, and she supports him and she's, I think it's more about the potential threat of foreign influence, of syncretism and so on, which is when we see the story Phineas stabbing either the Midianite or Moabite woman and the Israelite man. But they're getting led astray and worshiping false gods. There's nothing like that. No, there's no kind of real threat that Ruth entails in this story.
Could you say something? My Hebrew is rusty almost to the point of being irredeemable, but
Why we're here.
there throughout, and I think it was I'm trying to find it here, but there's this repetition that goes on in all of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And is that for poetic purposes, or is that for this is important purposes? And I know it might be both, but I can't, it seemed an incidental thing, and I can't find it. I don't even remember what it was. Something about there was a woman, she lay at his feet, he looked, and there was a woman at his feet. I think that was it.
Right. Yeah, we get that with verse 8, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me reading it in English as almost being humorous.
Yeah, I do think this is an entertaining scene.
It's playful.
It's
Yeah.
yeah. Repetition in general. I mean, Hebrew narrative, it's always worth paying. Hebrew narrative is sparse on details. Like if you read a good Russian novel, it's just super wordy, and they're long for a reason because they go on and give you all this detail that may or may not matter, right? But Hebrew narrative is, the conventions are that it's pretty sparse. And so then when you do have a certain type of repetition or a certain detail that's given, you probably ought to pay attention to it. So just generally speaking, some of that is just the format. Like here, all the repetition about what Naomi says to do, right? The text doesn't say, I mean, it does say this, but then it doesn't just say, and she did everything that Naomi told her to do. It says she did this and she did this, and it repeats all these things in order to like really demonstrate, I think. That's something we should pay attention to when it's repetitive, in order to say, saying something about Ruth's obedience to the command of Naomi. So I can't answer that, I don't think, for like all of Hebrew narrative, but generally speaking, yeah, I would say it's good storytelling from the Hebrew Bible perspective. It's usually some emphasis on the basis of kind of repetition. But if I haven't mentioned it already, in the book I still think is the best on all of this is Robert Alter's The Art of Biblical Narrative. It's really readable, and he gets into some things like this.
Amen to that. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
Say, Lance, a quick question on this marriage between Israelites and neighbors. And this is going to show my ignorance, but I honestly haven't really looked into this.
Uh-huh.
Bathsheba married a Hittite.
Yeah.
She was a daughter of Eliam. It's only mentioned twice in the Bible, once as her father and once as one of David's mighty men. Is that the same Eliam? And that was she an Israelite, Bathsheba?
It's a good question. I mean, at least makes the point that like David, and if you read the David stories, maybe somebody else here can help us with this one. But if you read the David narratives, right, he's surrounding himself with foreigners in his army. And I think David's coming out of the time of the judges when there's quite a bit of like neighborly interaction. I mean, that's a lot of the narrative of Judges, where you don't really get like this issue of marrying foreigners. You get around, in Torah, and then you get in Ezra and Nehemiah. Like you start getting it. It's like almost like they start practicing this, or strictly anyway, in the post-exilic period. So on that particular, I need to look at that passage I would assume that, well, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. Uriah is a Hittite, so a non-Israelite. Anybody got any insight on this?
But does Bathsheba not mean something like daughter of an oath or something like that? Which sounds pretty Israelite to me. Unless that's the name that she's given for the purpose of the story.
No, I mean, that's always a possibility, but yeah, Rabat is daughter, Shiva is an oath. So certainly in Hebrew name. But like Moab, these other neighboring countries they speak Canaanite dialects, and Hebrew is a Canaanite dialect. So there's some overlap. It's hard to tell. My guess, my kind of like gut reaction would be, yeah, Bathsheba, I do think is an Israelite. And sort of you're probably given to Uriah as, or Uriah meets her, or however that happened. That story we don't know about the two of them getting married. Uriah is joining the army, so he's joining the Israelites as a foreigner.
It's interesting because in Matthew's genealogy, which I looked at recently, but need to do again, is that Bathsheba, Rahab, and Ruth
Yeah.
are the three mentioned there
Yeah.
explicitly. And well, I guess,
Yeah.
you know,
So you
whereas Judah and Tamar, actually, sorry, one more, Tamar. So it's a real, almost sort of in your face statement of God's grace. Look, you guys have to live by what I tell you, but I'm going to do what suits my purposes.
yeah, that's a
to
well
show
put.
his grace, yeah, to the nations, which is why, you know, I guess Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob get away with lying, but Ananias and Sapphira are struck dead. Anyway,
Yeah.
thanks a lot for that. Yeah.
No, that's good. And Tamar is going to come up in Ruth's story. There's this, I think, in a parallel that becomes pretty obvious at the end. With they're obviously not the same story, but that Tamar Judah story, you have secrecy and sort of, but they're really different in other ways. Like Judah is not a man of valor in that story.
Yeah.
And you know, Tamar is, but she is seeking security. So there's like this kind of parallel and between the two.
Chad Ramsey has a really interesting theory on why put Genesis 38 between 37 and 39, and that God was maybe showing why the Israelites had to get out of Dodge. There was just too much temptation there.
Too much going on at home.
You had to get them out
Right.
into Egypt, where they were a bad, you know, bad aroma to the Egyptians who wanted nothing to do with them. Anyway, thanks a lot.
Yeah, it's an odd placement. Earlier, there was a question about Ruth being sort of before Song of Songs. I think, Sean, you asked that. And, you know, there's lots of different orders. And of course, these were independent scrolls. And so, but then they get collected. Sometimes there's meaning, like the phrase here, like in the chapter 3, we read it today, where Boaz recognizes Ruth as an Ashet Chayil. That phrase otherwise only occurs in Proverbs 31, who can find an Ashet Chayil. And the book of Ruth, at least in this collection, does seem to follow well. And now there's lots of differences between Ruth and the valorous woman of Proverbs 31. But if it's so she's not wealthy, right? She's not trading in the market and so on, at least in this story that we have. But character-wise, she really demonstrates what it means to be chayil, which doesn't mean wealth here. It means like valor. And Boaz, we heard in chapter 2 that he is a man of valor. So it's, and what we're going to see in chapter 4 is that they're going to have a child that is chayil. They're going to have a valorous child. So there's this like power couple dynamic between the two. The other thing I wanted to point out was when she says, spread out your wing over me. I think it was chapter 2, verse 11, I think. Let's see if I'm getting this right. Where he blesses her. Let's see. I have it written down here. Where Boaz is blessing Ruth and saying, you know, may the Lord put his wing over you. Let's see, where is this? maybe somebody finds it. She tells him in
11 or 12, maybe.
okay, yeah, verse 12. Good, thank you. Where, oh, may the Lord repay your deed, and may your wage be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, who has come, under whose wing you've come to seek refuge. Sort of, it's the Lord's wing that Ruth is seeking refuge under. But then Ruth says, it's almost like make good on your blessing. There's this, it's not just, she doesn't just want the kind words of blessing. She's asking Boaz to act essentially as this divine ambassador by putting his wing over her. So there's something in this also about sort of, God is Lord, Yahweh comes up a lot in Ruth, but there's also this, it's not, they're not just waiting passively by, Ruth is not, for the Lord's blessing to come to her. She's sneaking out in the middle of the night and courageously telling Boaz, make good on your blessing, live out the blessing you gave to me.
Well, the blessing was originally from Naomi back in chapter 2, verse 12, wasn't it?
That was Boaz speaking to her.
2:12.
I think so. Yes.
The Lord repay you for what you've done.
Yeah. This is when they're in the field
Okay.
together. She's kind of falling before him, and why have I found favor in your eyes? In verse 10, even though I'm a foreigner. And Boaz then answered her in verse 11, and then that continues on in verse 12. And then she responds, I have found favor in your eyes.
Okay. Okay, that is a connection there, definitely.
Yeah. Good. Well, any other kind of final questions? I thought we might possibly do 4 today, but we're going to do that next month. So any other kind of final words or questions?
Well, my wife is suggesting that I bring in an observation that kind of goes downstream from Ruth, like the earlier questions about Bathsheba. There's a fascinating one-line statement, I believe it's in the early chapters of First Kings, where it's something that a casual reader is just going to read right over. It says, here's this name of a person that has no role in the plot line, and he marries this person, this woman, and her name is given, and she has no role in the plot line. The sister of Zeruiah, the daughter of Nahash. Now, those two names do show up all in very important ways. But this person, this otherwise anonymous person, is the daughter of Nahash and the sister of Zeruiah, both. This puts real color in the story of David. Zeruiah is David's sister.
Oh.
Zeruiah also has 3 sons that are as old or older than David is. And when David becomes king, he says himself, even though I am king, do not have authority to punish one of those 3 sons who was a murderer. There's something about this family of Zeruiah that has enormous political power, more so than the king of Israel.
Yeah.
Well, this Nahash is the family name of the king of Ammon. I'm looking at that and going, well, how can Zeruiah be the sister of David and also the daughter of the king of Ammon? And the commentary, the Zondervan commentary says, the best we can make of that is the old Nahash died. His widow went over to Bethlehem and married Jesse, and she took with her daughter Zeruiah and her sons. And then this new widow has David. If that's the case, then David is half Ammonite, as well as partly Moabite, as well as partly descended from Rahab. David is mostly Gentile.
I haven't looked into that yeah, and nearly the detail that you have, but it is interesting to, I mean, like fascinating to try to put some of those the lineage and the family tree together, and it gets pretty messy for sure. So that, thank you for sharing that. I need to look at that more. It's good.
I wonder with all this language of blessing, we have Israelites and non-Israelites, if this is somehow calling back Abraham's blessing and covenant with God in Genesis 12.
Yeah.
Would that play out here?
Yeah, a blessing of an outsider for sure. I mean, of course, Genesis 12 and the mission of Israel to bless the other nations.
And
go ahead.
And as we see, Ezra and Nehemiah are one part of we see the inclusion of the Gentiles and the prophets pre and post exile.
Yeah.
The expectation of the inclusion of the nations is pretty common, and Ezra and Nehemiah focusing pretty contextually on life in Israel.
Yeah, I mean, another text that we could throw in there that's probably from the post-exilic period that I was talking about earlier would be the last part of Isaiah 55 or 56 through 66, where, I mean, it's a radical text about the inclusion of foreigners, even in serving in the temple, seemingly, and eunuchs. I mean, like the people who weren't allowed, and it's on the basis of their fidelity, of their faithfulness, of their character. So Ruth, I think, fits with this a lot, like, and even Boaz recognizing her chesed, right? And the chesed, it came up earlier, her commitment to Naomi was the first act of chesed, and now to Boaz. Like, you would choose me? And like, it's about, and that's what essentially gets her in, right? It's her character that demonstrates her status and not her nationality. And that does seem to me to be an important just theological point that's made throughout the Hebrew Bible. That God is the God of all nations, not just the God of Israel.
And you notice that Ruth does this by action, not by going up to Boaz and speaking to him and saying, hey, you're the kinsman redeemer, because that's considered bossy for a woman.
Yeah, she does say some things, but she's definitely acting, and she's not just having this conversation in the field in front of people, right?
She's not trying to boss him.
Yeah, and so we'll see the extension of this in chapter 4, where Boaz becomes the main character, and Ruth sort of becomes she's off stage for most of chapter 4. But that's where you have the formal like confrontation with the other potential redeemer. Well, all right. Thank you, everybody. I really enjoy this. I hope it's been good for you. And I'll be sending out a notification, but I think the third Wednesday in November, that's not Thanksgiving, I don't think. It'd be the week before Thanksgiving week. So we'll meet again at 9 a.m. Central that Wednesday.
Awesome. Thank you.
See you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Lance.
You're welcome.